So, good morning. And with a bio like that, some people call me a serial not-for-profit organizer. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. So here we're to talk about Chorus, which is my latest venture. And as Fred says, it's all about public access. But it's really all about five things. And why is it five things? Because I've got 5 fingers. So it's about identification, discovery, access, preservation, and bringing it all together in compliance. I'm not going to spend too much time on this particular slide because Fred's already covered it, but publishers got together and formed this Chorus idea after the OSTP memo. And so we have this slide here just to give you a quick overview of what that memo was about. And as Fred said, it was issued in February 2013, the draft plans were submitted, and after quite a delay, they're now back out to the agencies for revision. But that's really good progress. And that means that the conversations have been renewed with a much more vigor. I can't tell you how many meetings I've now had with those 21 different agencies. So Chorus is a not-for-profit entity. It started out as an idea in the spring of last year, and then formed as a separate entity in October of last year. And we've just this week filed for our 501c3 status, and now it's up to the IRS gods to determine that for us. There are over 100 signatories that are involved, and we're also exploring international partnerships because one of the important things to note is that public access is not just an issue in the United States. We're already having conversations with the UK, with the EU, with Australia, and many others. One of the most important things to note is that even though people refer to it as a project, it's truly a service. It's already in pilot. It already has the beginnings of its funding. Who are our board members? Here you can see, Fred, do you mind? Can you hand me just my coffee there? All right, fighting allergies here, so I take a sip every so often. You can see amongst our board members, we have the large and small publishers. We have the not-for-profit and the commercial publishers. We also have service bureaus like Silverchair, and importantly, we also have the backing of the AAP. And amongst our signatories, which I'll show you in a second, we also have the backing of STM and many others. The thing to note here is that these are not just fancy logos. These are actual board members that at the beginning met every week as a board and now meet every other week as a board. They are invested in this. Here's the list of over 100 that we have. And again, you'll see it's a cross-section. Lots of them with the word American in it, and that's not a surprise. And then you can see that it ranges from even folks that are international. So the Royal Society is here. The Royal Society of Chemistry is here. Most recently, Nature Publishing Group has joined. We have AAAS, the Publishers of Science. The great and good are all here. So we talked about the OSTP memo, right? And sure, it's all about free public access to peer-reviewed research articles with that guideline about 12-month embargo, which might be adapted to meet a specific discipline need. So what does Chorus do? Well, Chorus' answer to that is to provide free public access to the best available version. What do I mean by that? I mean that either the accepted author manuscript or the published version of record. And that would then be available after a post-agency embargo, or if paid for by an article processing charge, it would be available either immediately or whatever deal that particular author might have cut with that particular publisher. But there's an answer to it. And then the memo also called for the ability to optimize search, archival, and dissemination features to encourage innovation. We've got an API which layers right on top of all of the cross-ref stuff. And that enables content syndication and search services. And we'll go into detail a little bit more about each one of these. The memo calls for interoperability and long-term stewardship. Fred's already mentioned it. The ecosystem already has a solution. It's called Clocks in Portico. And so we're in deals with both of those, as well as we also have another one that's experimental just for the sake of getting our pilot stuff done, that we've been working with the DOE and a company called Deep Web Technologies, just to show that we are serious about archiving. So every bit of our pilot is already stored in perpetuity. And then policies on public data, the key word there being data, are called for. So here, the Chorus infrastructure can link to data repositories when they're available. And as you'll hear me talk later, you'll see this is the big new area for us. It's the big new area for many of us here. But the Chorus infrastructure is scalable to deal with it. And lastly, to develop plans in consultation with stakeholders. Chorus is already working actively with the agencies. So whenever you talk about a product, the first thing you should do, is to define your stakeholders. And so we've defined more than a dozen stakeholders, but here's our top 5. These are the ones that are the really important ones. And obviously you've got Allen Agency. So he represents our agency stakeholder. Well, they've been mentioned a lot today. And what do they want to do? Well, they want to make sure that they are meeting the guidelines of the OSTP memo. They also want to make sure that they're getting the return on investment for the grants that they send out. Okay? And they want to make sure that there is access to the information that they actually have helped fund. So that's really what Allen's about. And then you got Rachel. Now Rachel's quite a bit different. Rachel wants to get funding for her information, for her research. She also wants to be compliant, but not with OSTP. In fact, she arguably doesn't even know what OSTP stands for. She wants to be compliant with whatever her agency says, or her funder, whoever that may be. And ultimately, though, she's very busy. Okay? So she wants to avoid administrative work. One of the things that is very important for everyone involved in Chorus is to make sure that the things that we're asking people to do are easy and are normal, and not adding to the already existing burden. Then we've got Lottie, the librarian. I've got a librarian sitting right here, so I look very carefully when I say things like this. But in my conversations, in my real 6 months worth working on Chorus, I've seen one of the biggest things that's changed about the librarian is, in my past there was known as guys that kept the stacks in order, the people that might go shh. Those are the old librarians. But that's not the new librarian. Right? The new librarian, one of the things that I've really come to understand is that they're becoming more and more involved with making sure that their researchers that work at that institution comply with funding agency requirements. It's become a growing role in what they're doing. Is that correct? Yeah, good. Okay. I'm always checking these stakeholders, because I didn't make these up, right? This is what I've heard. Right? And then there is also the job of making sure that they have access for their patrons. That's still a really important job of the librarian. So Lottie has a stake at the table, a very important stake. And then there's Peter. And Peter wants to have access to the content because he wants to research a problem, as Fred was saying, or to drive some economic development, which also Fred touched on. But Peter also wants to merge this in with learning tools, so education, and how does that all work together? These are things that Peter wants. And then there's Penny the publisher, my former self. The Penny the publisher wants to help authors and institutions comply with the funder mandates, but she also wants to retain traffic on her websites. And she wants to keep the content in context. So when you put all that together, you're talking about identification, you're talking about discovery, preservation, access, and compliance. All of them need all of those 5 things. But as Fred said, we want to preserve the agency funds for research. We want to build on what we already have. So on the identification front, we've got Crossref and its service around funding, which is called FundRef. On the researcher identification front, we've got ORCID. And on the preservation front, we've already got Portico and Clocks. Let's reuse that, folks. We've been spending the last 25 years building these systems. Let's make sure they're put to their maximum. So how does this all work? So, as Fred said, that researcher on the upper left there, so there's Rachel at work. And she wants to submit a paper to a journal. The first thing they're going to deal with is a publisher's manuscript tracking system. Okay? And that could be an eJournal Press, a Scholar One, an editorial manager, a bench press from Highwire, or it could be a homegrown brew. It could be any of those. But all of them now have a screen which is enabling the researcher to enter the funder information and then the grant reference number. Now that funder information is significant because that funder information is actually not just an open field, it's actually a controlled vocabulary that is supplied behind the scenes by FundRef. That includes all of the agency hierarchies. It started out at roughly about 2,000 terms when they started last year. Now, as of March this year, it's 5,900 terms. That's worldwide, folks. It's not just the United States, so don't be scared. But the reality here is this is an important thing, and it shows the granularity of detail that the funding agencies actually want. And what publishers can then do with this information is, after the information is gathered in the master contracting system, they can then choose to validate the metadata against the acknowledgement section of the paper. So additional validation can be done by the publisher, or not. It's a choice. Okay? That information then travels along with the rest of the bibliographic metadata, the DOI as we've come to know it, to Crossref. Okay? So the same workflow, nothing new there, just adding 2 additional fields. Now, talking about things that are normal, it is normal for a publisher to preserve their articles. And how do they do that? Once it's been published up on their website, they then deposit it in Clocks or Portico or some other dark archive, or even a PubMed Central, which you could categorize as a bright archive. Okay, so it's, again, a normal thing that publishers do. Okay, access. Well, here's the thing that's slightly different. So access in the chorus world and in the world of OSTP is then made available after an agency embargo period expires on the publisher's website, or if it's a gold OA model, as mentioned by Fred, it's made available either immediately or maybe after some delay based on whatever that publisher's given policy is on the publisher's website. The publisher then decides, is it going to be the accepted author manuscript, or is it going to be the version of record that is available? But all following the same DOI, okay? Business as usual. Discovery. Well, all this is great and good, but if you can't discover the thing, as Fred rightly said, it's kind of worthless, because it is a sea of information that's out there. So we have an API that layers on top of the Crossref API. That API will empower search engines, either our search engine, which we have built as an exemplar, agency search engines, such as one I'll show you in a second, Google itself, Bing, it doesn't really matter. Okay, all of that can use the metadata that is served up by our API. But equally, you can do text and data mining, too, from that metadata, because it will point you back to the publisher's site to harvest that information. So all of this is enabling. So here's inside of our search engine. This is live today. So if you go to search.chorusAccess.org on any of your devices that you might have in front of you, and you type in NSF, you'll see a pull down. That pull down lists out the National Science Foundation as well as others. This is powered by that hierarchy. Okay? And that hierarchy is always being up to date. One thing I should mention about the hierarchy is that Elsevier and their SciVal project started out with that hierarchy. They then granted it over to FundRef, and they keep it up to date. So there's actually a living, breathing mechanism for keeping that hierarchy up to date. So once you click on NSF, you'll then be driven down further, and you'll see here on the left-hand side, you have all the various NSF directorates, and if you were then to click on any of those given directorates, it will then filter further. On the right-hand side, you actually have the metadata coming up about those particular articles, and there you see that you've got a DOI link for all of those articles, again, driving it back to the publisher site, where you will find either the accepted author manuscript or the version of record. One thing to note, and it's a very important thing, is that if you look there carefully, I don't know if you can quite read it, but in every one of the entries there, you'll see the funding information. Okay? But you'll notice that it's not just the NSF. Every entry there has more than one funder. As we've been looking through our pilot information, we're seeing that as the norm, not the exception. So there's at least 2 in almost every instance. That means that you're going to, the researchers out there are going to have to deal most likely with 2 agencies, not just necessarily 1. So for many publishers who say, I'm a medical publisher, I've got it all solved with NIH. Look carefully at your data, because I bet it's NIH and somebody else. It's NIH and DOE, NIH and NSF, what have you. Just important to know. If you then scroll down further in that page, you'll see that what we have there is what publications were in that results set, what publishers published the journals in that results set, and what years this all came from. So we just tried to show how much information that we had within our data. Okay? But as I mentioned, it's not just about our search exemplar. It's also about enabling agencies to build their own portals. And here's an example of looking behind the scenes of the DOE pages system that is not yet launched. Okay? But if you have the password, and they've given me permission for anyone who wants it, if you want access to it, if you were to do a search, and they have author search as well as subject search, you get the same types of data. Why are you getting the same types of data? Because it's powered by the very same API, which is giving you the very same metadata. Again, we want discovery to happen. We don't really want to claim that we're going to create a new Google. That's not our game. Our game is to make sure that the information that we have is discoverable and eventually leading the researcher and anybody that wants to read the content back to the publisher site. Well, I mentioned that Chorus is all about compliance. So we've created dashboards and enabled our API to help monitor and track the publisher contributions. So our purpose is to make sure that the publishers are staying honest, that they're doing what they say. Okay? So, and this again can be done in our dashboard that we've created, again live at dashboard.chorusaccess.org, and we have a variety of flavors of them. I'll show you the NSF one, but there's also one for DOE, NIH, and others, USDA. But again, if you don't like our dashboard, you can create your own reports. So the government agency can create their own reports or mix it in with theirs. The institutions can create their own reports, and publishers can indeed create their own reports. Here's a look inside as what this is about. Here you see that in our data set, again, this is just our pilot data. We have roughly 11,000 articles that have been identified as having NSF funding. Okay. We also monitor the agreeable license. That means, does it have a license that is explaining what you can do with that particular article? Okay. And is it agreeable to what the NSF wants? Now, of course, the NSF hasn't really launched their plan yet, so but just acting as a proxy, we've said, we think this is what the NSF might want, so does it follow, say, a 12-month embargo, a guess, right, et cetera. And we track all that information. Okay? And we track it on a daily basis. Okay? Can we find the content? Is it truly accessible outside of the publisher's paywall? Okay? Yes or no? And does it have an archive agreement also? Is it deposited in Clocks or Portico? And here, we're not accepting just the publisher's word. We're actually only accepting the word of the archive. So the archive gives back to us a list of DOIs that they have in their archive. Now this is important, because actually, I don't know this data has ever been surfaced before. So you all say that you deposit in archives, but actually no one's ever tested that to see, is it actually truly there? At least I'm not aware of the research that's been done. So these are the beginnings of what hopefully are very useful dashboards. And if you were to click on that data tab at the very top, you can then drive into all the data and to actually see what's there and what the American Chemical Society is doing, what the American Institute of Physics is doing, and you can actually see. So it's not just little donuts and line graphs. You can actually get at the data. So as I mentioned, and Fred mentioned, we were in ramp-up mode back in February through June. They hired me as a consultant in July to really get them going. We delivered our proof of concept in time to help the agencies start to make their decisions regarding their first proposals. We then built a pilot and had it shipped and ready by the end of September in time for Frankfurt. So our then it was 7 pilot publishers, all were submitting data, and we had a nice chunk, about 13,000 records that were in our pilot. Since then, we then incorporated, they then hired me full time, which was great. We then had moved from our initial just pilot in phase 1, which had those 7 publishers, to a phase 2, which now includes over a dozen. And that was really important because you now had new people who had to learn the lingo and learn the new ways of doing things. And it's been working really well. We've been learning a lot along the way. And our intention is to be fully in production in July 2014. What do I mean by production? Well, in production, it's where the publishers are actually submitting new material, not just one-time chunk, but actually as the things come into the system and they're gathering information, meaning that a manuscript has been accepted, it'll start to feed through the entire system. That's what it means to be in production. Fred mentioned it before about Share. So when Share got started around the same time as Chorus did, we didn't exactly know how things were going to shake out between the two, but Chorus did state from the beginning that it wanted to be inclusive and it wanted to interoperate with all the various different scholarly repositories and systems that were out there. I mean, reuse what's there, reuse what the agencies and the stakeholders need. So we had a meeting way back in July, and we had a follow-up meeting in February to discuss the initiatives and explore possible different collaborations. Happy to see that we centered on identifiers. That was near and dear to my heart, so that was good. Metrics was another important thing. And then most recently, Cher came out with a really great idea for a notification system. And so we've actually been dealing with a little bit more formalizing our relationship, and I've joined their workflow working group, which has been a very positive experience, and I can immediately see how both of the groups can work together. So what about this data thing? Well, this is the biggest greenfield. We're really unsure whether or not there's going to be one mechanism for data and publications. We're pretty sure there isn't, maybe just one. But I would say all the publishers that are involved with Chorus do believe that when you get to the connection point between the data that's directly behind the charts, the figures that are actually in those articles, that's certainly a good place to start, and a good place that publishers have a role to play. The things that are further down, as far as the complete data set that were done in the experiment, big open question. That's where the question mark comes in. But the Chorus infrastructure is very scalable. It's all about metadata, and it's all about identifiers and standards. So as soon as things start to shake out, we can start adapting that and again, using things that we already have, using the infrastructure that we already have to build out to make data discovery happen too. And obviously, we're already in discussions with DataCite as well as Crossref, because those are two big players that are already collecting information beyond just the content, also about the data. So, long story short, what do publishers need to do? One, become signatory of Chorus. I will encourage you to do so. It literally takes you about 4 minutes to sign up on our website. Become a member of Crossref if you're not amongst that 4,400 already. Please do, because it's a key thing, because you need to get information to FundRef. The way to do that is to be a member of Crossref. You need to submit agency-related data to Crossref, FundRef, as I've already said. So that's a key thing. You need to also do one additional thing, which is if you don't already have a license policy out on your website, we ask that you do put a license policy out on your website. This is about the reuse terms for your articles that are public access. And then once you do that, we then ask to publish a URI within Crossref that actually says where the full text can be acquired. Then over time, you can become either a member of our pilot, or coming this summer, you can become a member of Chorus. And then please do make sure to archive your content. That's it. I recommend that you have a look at chorusaccess.org. There's a lot more information there. And if you want an even deeper dive than what I've given you today, there will be a webinar on May 16th from 11 to 1. That's our second workshop. You might ask, well, how come you're not inviting me to the first workshop? Well, I'm sorry, the first workshop is sold out. So that first workshop is actually going to be an in-person thing at the American Chemical Society next Monday. And for those of you who have signed up, I look forward to seeing you there. So thank you very much.